So look, thank you everyone for joining us today. We've got an exciting topic today, road mapping in 2020. It's part of the webinar series we've been doing. There's a lot more coming up over the next few months as well. So keep an eye out for that on our events page. And yeah, today you've got myself and my colleague Liam, and we'll introduce ourselves in a second. So yep, next slide. A bit of housekeeping actually quickly. The webinar is being recorded, so we'll be able to provide a link to that later. Mute all of your microphones and things like that. We'll be doing that as well, making sure that there's no cross chatter and things like that. If you have any questions, post them in the chat feature and make sure you post them to everyone, so both Liam and I can see them. We might take some along the way. We'll wait and see how that plays out, but I'll certainly be happy to take some Q&A at the end there. We've got a fair few of you on here, so obviously get your questions in early, and we'll be able to take some of those through the course of today. If we don't get time to do that, then we will kind of directly reach out to you afterwards and answer whatever questions you may have. Okay, so quickly, just some background on Avolution. So we've been around for almost 20 years now. We have offices all around the world. Liam and I are both based out of our Sydney office in Australia. I'm sure most of you know we're incredibly proud of that we're #1 on the Magic Quadrant and the Forrester Wave. So the analysts certainly have worked out how great we are. We do have customers all around the world. So again, Liam and I work with most of the Asia-Pac customers, which of course is what most of you guys probably are, given that the time zone here is not so conducive to the UK at the moment. And it's not too bad in the UK actually, but in the middle of the night in America, definitely. So again, as I said, my name is Tim O'Neill. I was one of the people who started the company. I've been with it for 20 years. I did a PhD before that. I get to work with sort of the bigger clients that we have and on a lot of the strategy sessions that we do internally. So if some of you don't know me, some of you certainly do, obviously reach out to your account managers and they can connect you. And yeah, Liam, I'll leave you to introduce yourself, I guess.
Thanks, Tim, and hi, everyone. As Tim said, my name's Liam. I've been with Avolution for 4 years now, nearly coming up to 5. Previously started in EMEA, but I've worked across many of the countries in EMEA, as well as APAC and as well for our global teams. So I've worked alongside all varying departments in Avolution, or certainly many of them at least, and worked with quite a lot of our clients.
Okay, so look, a little sort of sit rep of where the market is now. Now, of course, there's been a pretty significant curveball thrown all of our way in the last few months, and we'll address that. But let's sort of just do a bit of a sort of step back and look at the position of our market as per the sort of start of the year and the way that we were all anticipating things were going to play out this year. So there's a really good piece of work done by an analyst group called Harvey Nash. We can provide you the link to their reports. They're freely available, PDFs, great piece of work that sort of positions EA within the broader market. They highlight these 6 different areas. Okay, so there's of course many sort of topics, many different areas that we all get involved in as enterprise architects, but these are the 6 which resonated with us and certainly is that Harvey Nash feels like we should be prioritizing, and indeed CIOs should be prioritizing as well. To sum it up, we've often used a phrase which is, cloudy with a chance of hybrid. What we mean by that is that people ultimately do want to be going to the cloud. They do want to have, use thing everywhere, using it on any platforms they have, whether it's, tablets or, desktops and phones and stuff like that. But it's not a wall-to-wall thing. We have many clients who, of course, have sensitive information, government departments and things like that, where they're not allowed to put things in the cloud, even with GovCloud initiatives that are around the world. So they're always going to be on-prem. So we have that kind of hybrid. So that's certainly going to be the way going forwards, but it obviously affords that collaboration. It affords the onboarding, painlessly for people, things available through the browser. That, of course, then opens up these other 2 topics to the right, which is all about cybersecurity and the protection of all of that critical data and making sure that it's all only in the right hands. And the irony being that we're using Zoom for the first time. So sorry, apologies, and we might have some teething problems, but I'm sure you've read in the press about some of the privacy issues with Zoom. And then indeed privacy in general. GDPR is a big topic that came out in Europe towards the end of last year. And there's sort of similar legislation that's being rolled out around the world, in America certainly, and here in Asia Pac. If I sort of keep going kind of clockwise, if we look at complexity here, things are getting, more complex. You can't make complex things simple. But you can certainly hope to understand complex things, and that's a lot of what we try and do in the company, is try to find the forest for the trees. Trying to find those bits of insight that are useful and not be clouded by all of the noise that's around. What are those insights? It's decision support, right? Fundamentally, that's what we do as architects. We try to be what's referred to often as a trusted advisor. So our job is to try to provide some quantitative recommendations to management to make decisions, okay? Using all of the tools in our toolkit to do that, all of the spreadsheets we can muster and all of the different sort of benchmarking and things like that we can do. And ultimately, though, we've got to put this in people's hands. Okay, so it's all about self-service. It's all about providing the right information at the right time to the right people. Now that's of course even more topical now with us all working from home, as these things need to be found. You can't just prairie dog is a phrase we use. You can't just pop over the partition in the shared open plan workplace and ask someone a question. You have to be more organized about that now, and you have to be able to find the answers yourself. So hopefully collaboratively and working with your colleagues, but all that's done digitally now. Okay, next slide. The analysts have done a fair bit of work around this, of course. We talked about Harvey Nash before. Now let's a quick little shout out to Gartner, who of course we've worked with for many years. So they have these different hype cycles. I'm not going to spend too long on this. You can go and grab copies of these out there. They talk about obviously as things go up, there's a trigger and something rises to this kind of peak of expectation, whether it's inflated or not. You then kind of come down this trough of kind of disillusionment, and ultimately you sort of plateau out into some sort of productivity. So that's the idea, is things come in and they kind of go through this pipeline and become more and more popular until they eventually become industrialized or become standardized. So there's definitely a couple of topics on there when you look at emerging tech that really should excite us as architects. So there's things like knowledge graphs, okay, graph analytics, citizens data science, or democratic kind of work there, synthetic data. And then as you move to the right in this other hype cycle, which is all around the digital workplace, which of course is even more relevant now, we're all obviously online. There's a few things there around remote working and collaborative work management, and Liam will show you some really cool things that we think can really enable that to make the experience pretty seamless, right? Because if you're going to get people to be collaborating, and you're going to get onboarding of people from the far-flung reaches of your organization geographically and functionally, they need a pretty painless way to jump in. And so we've got lots of good techniques through working in the collaboration environments like Microsoft Teams and Slack and things like that, where people just start using these different techniques without even necessarily knowing they are. They're just going to a tab and starting their day. So that's a really painless way to get people in and to get people collaborating and delivering value. But unfortunately, and if Liam brings up the animation, that's all good theory. The reality in the past was, of course, digital transformation. You do your digital strategies and your IT strategies, supporting your business strategy and all that good stuff. You might do it on an annual cycle if you're lucky. But there's this curveball that we all know now. COVID-19 has really changed things. So everyone in a very short period of time has had to really change their entire way of working. Many businesses have gone to the wall. Okay, so this is not to be taken lightly. So certainly there's some pretty significant pressures being put on us, and we use the word roadmap. Of course, roadmap is fundamentally something that is just looking at the future and how we can cope with the present and move forward. So it's very topical. That's obviously hopefully why a lot of you have joined today, to sort of see some of the things that we can hopefully help you use to navigate this interesting time. Those other slides were a little bit academic. They're kind of talking about hype cycles and all this kind of stuff and the future and all that sort of stuff. The way we like to look at it's like this, okay? So you've got to pace yourself. So there's a metaphor there that's, kind of tries to draw an analogy between, sprints versus marathons. So, again, using the sprint word with agile and all that sort of stuff versus a marathon, which is the long game strategic stuff. So there is that whole interplay between those two time dimensions, okay? We need to be very available, very agile, very quick in our decision making to support the agile, innovative ideation way of thinking. But at the same time, we have to be much more long-term, waterfall, strategic to support those 5-year, 10-year plans that people have. So you have to pace yourself. You can't start too slow, but then again, you obviously can't start out too fast. So we've got a whole lot of kind of different topics on this and different bits we can add to that picture. But the idea is, as Gartner coined it, it's a time to value. Very quickly, we could fill up a repository with loads of information that might be of poor quality, and then we could start to make some pretty dubious decisions with that information. So that's not going to help anyone, right? It's going to lose credibility, and it's going to obviously potentially make some pretty bad recommendations. But you can do that and start to use your quarantining, use your data cleansing, all those different things to try to make sure that the quality of the information you're putting out is of high value and, of course, in the people's hands when they need it. Okay, so don't be too big bang about this or black box. Too many times we've heard of people, spending 6 months to try to get some recommendation. You're going to lose the business if you take that long. So you've got to pace yourself, but then don't dilly-dally. Make sure you still deliver things in time and of value. There we go. Sorry, that was my last bit. So with that, though, I will throw to Liam to take us through the bulk of this. And remind everyone, if you've got questions, throw them in the chat feature. I'll be monitoring that. I can possibly answer some of them in line. Some of them, obviously, if they're too difficult to answer in a chat, we'll take at the end, and we'll be able to. I'll put them to Liam and myself, and we'll take them at the end. We should have time for that. So with that, Liam, over to you.
Thank you, Tim. I assume you can hear me okay?
Yep. Audio is fine. Yep.
Fantastic. All right, excellent. So as Tim was sort of saying, the digital transformation part of, I guess, everyone's job at the moment is critically important. Whether you've already been on that journey, whether you've just started due to the current climate and the current situations that we're all working on, it is fundamentally one of the core things that everyone is focused on today, certainly from a work perspective, but everyone is thinking about it as well. We, of course, have to think about how we're dealing with things now with that current situation, as well as into the future and what might come out of this at the other side. Will it be a new normal? Will we revert back to the way things were? Or will it be somewhere in between? Have to be prepared for all of that. And hopefully with some of the stuff we're going to look at today, especially the road mapping side of things, we'll be able to give you a bit more of an idea of how you might be able to approach some of these questions. Of course, the first and foremost with any sort of roadmap is where do we want to be and how do we get there? There is, of course, the question to this, which is certainly where are we right now? But I'm sure you all certainly understand that side of things. So when we talk about roadmaps, and we've talked about this quite a lot over the last 20 years, we've done a lot of research on this already. You can even just check out our website for some of the previous presentations that we've done. And you can also look at our social channels for any of the videos that we've put together on road mapping. But we've done a lot of work around roadmaps, as have the wider EA community. Most people can't agree, I should say, on what exactly a roadmap is, but they all have the one underlying principle, which is the concept of time. We've broken down roadmaps into 4 distinct types here for you. And again, this is something that we've spoken about quite a bit over the last couple of years. It's sort of a tried and true method, if you will. So the first one, the type 1, tagging with recommendations. Many people would know that, of course, as a heat map or a color map. And the whole concept there is to provide clear direction fast. The real key thing to remember here, though, is that you only need one property in order to do that. You don't need to necessarily have a full catalog or a complete book, if you will, of all these different data bits. You only need one property to be able to say, this is what we recommend we do. This is the course of action we should take. The second, the type 2, life cycle and waterfall charts, or again, Gantt charts or Gantt charts, depending on your pronunciation. A lot of people would be familiar with this from agile methodology. As Tim said before, you have to consider sprints and marathons. So being able to look at the entire timeline, not just one particular one, not just the overarching timeline that we're dealing with. Perhaps we need to consider the application lifecycle, or we need to look at the lifecycle of a project. What's its start date, its end date, and any critical milestones in between. This, of course, allows us to start turning our strategy into an executable plan. And that brings us to sort of our type 3 roadmap. And that is to cover off one of the most key questions we certainly receive any day today or any given day is, can you do impact analysis? And I'm sure every EA out there and on the call today would have had that question as well. What do we understand about the changes we want to make in our organization to our architecture? If we make this change, if we change the server or perhaps this project, if we look at a new strategy, what will be the impact across the organization? And we need to be able to communicate that quite clearly and quite quickly to any stakeholders that might be asking those questions. The entire concept here, of course, is to provide a compelling case for that change and to be able to identify the risks and strategies and how we might manage them. Which brings us to our type 4, the multiple architectures roadmap. It's very, it's a sort of the end game, if you will, of the roadmap types. So being able to create this type of roadmap will help define the overall direction of the organization and will allow people to lead boldly, but with key information. And that information, of course, needs to remain current, accurate, and relevant. So you can almost think of it as a forward-backwards concept. You certainly can't get to that end state and start there. If you do, you would quickly ask to have all the other types of roadmaps as well. You start drilling down into these questions. If we pivot in this direction, what will be the impact across our organization, or how long will this take? And certainly, what recommendations do we have at an operational or technical level? Across all of this, of course, IT will be a market differentiator and certainly a main differentiator for any organization. And those with the most, the best teams, I should say, or the most practice teams will certainly be the ones that come out on top at the end of all of this, and certainly lead into the future as well. We have put together some, I would say, guidelines or certainly some key points that you could use to start building out a resilient roadmap. Now we can go through these point by point if you wish, but you can all see them on screen, I assume. So I won't read them out one by one. But overall, this does sound like a huge packet of work. I mean, it's no mean feat, that's for sure. But you don't necessarily need to do the entire build in one day. You're better off focusing on agility. As I said before, if you can provide clear direction and do that quickly, that is one of the most fundamental things that you can do to assist your organization. The key steps here are to focus on the resilience of the roadmap. You don't necessarily want to, as we say, anti-fragilize everything, because that is impossible. To basically have a strategy for every possible threat that's out there, or everything that could affect your organization, is just not doable. So we must set priorities, which requires probabilistic forecasting. As I said, can't do all this in a day. So you have to imbue those levels of modularity. As I said, Rome was not built in a day. So it's important to understand an iterative and over time, those changes that may need to occur in order to build that resilient roadmap. As always, ensure that you communicate this and any of your analysis with your stakeholders, whether that's upstream, downstream, or externally. It's very important to ensure that you communicate current, accurate, and relevant information to ensure that you build the best and most resilient roadmap that's available. And of course, this is not just for IT. It's not just for EA, but this applies to all teams across the organization. Speaking of which, I'm sure you'll all be very familiar with this sort of scene. A simple coffee or tea house, but we're going to take a look at this as an enterprise, and this will kick off some of the other examples we want to show you today. So this is one of the oldest institutions, which have now been completely thrown into disarray and have had to pivot quite dramatically. So if we go back to looking at our Type 4 roadmap, this is a pan-enterprise, if you will, change. They've had to completely change their model, completely change perhaps their supply chains, their value offering, everything. It's very dramatic. So you think you might have it bad with some of the changes you need to make today? Have a spare thought for these guys who have to make some massive changes. Tying that back into the previous slide, some of the changes they might look at. They need to now accommodate new regulations. As you can see here, if this doesn't give you the heebie-jeebies, as it were, or give you a bit of fear, everyone gathering in a very small confined space, not socially distancing or not physically distancing, as it were. Coffee shops can no longer allow this. No? They need to put in place things which stop their sort of fundamental value-adding concepts. They can't allow people to come in and congregate or share stories or even just share a coffee. So a lot of these businesses have had to implement changes such as distancing or in-store limits, maybe changing to pickup windows and online delivery instead. They've also had to look at streamlining their processes and perhaps fortifying their inventory. So this lively coffee shop, as it were, is no longer. They've had to perhaps switch to a dark kitchen. If you're not familiar with that concept, a dark kitchen is somewhere where they just make the food and there's no shop front. They make the food and they just ship it out using any methods possible. They may also need to look at fortifying or bulk order supply with their suppliers, and to ensure that they have that consistency, not only for their raw products, but perhaps for their services as well. They need to look at extending the value chain, so they can no longer just focus on providing this one space, this environment where you can come and congregate, because that's no longer a possibility. They need to now think about, what perhaps is the quality of the coffee. Maybe they need to reinvest in that particular area. There is, of course, that level of comfort as well, which is typical in a coffee or a tea house, which everyone is accustomed to. And now these businesses need to find a way of providing that at home, in everyone's individual homes, or perhaps wherever the coffee might be consumed. Some people still certainly going to workplaces, others might be drinking coffee on a work site. So being able to provide that level of comfort, that same value, is very important. They may also look at things such as loyalty programs, or as some very innovative companies have come up with, these digital coffee catch-ups. So still providing that same atmosphere, as it were, or that same level of connection that people were asking for, but in a digital platform. Overall, there has been some really fast players and there's been some really slow players as well. But the key differentiator is being able to build, measure, and adapt fast. So you've certainly probably seen some coffee shops or tea houses out there, other small businesses as well, looking at different platforms and how to get their product to their end customer. They might use services such as Deliveroo or Uber Eats or Easy. They may look at also having shorter or longer supply chains. They may have previously said, we make the coffee, hand it straight to the customer. Now we have to think about making the coffee, having a delivery driver pick that up, and then having that passed on to the customer, and all of the points in between which influence those. Certainly the temperatures, you're looking at the time delivery, the order volumes that are coming through to those platforms, and making sure that those services are available. Of course, none of this would be worth the effort if no one knew that you were still open. So keeping everyone up to date, again, communication, keeping customers, suppliers, and stakeholders updated, very important. So for our coffee shop here, they need to make sure that they're pushing out regular updates and having as clear and open communication as possible. And as we like to say, little and often. So it doesn't necessarily need to be a huge statement or a CEO's announcement. It can be simple communication that says, hey, we're still here, we're still operating, and these are some of the changes we're making gradually. Throughout all this is a big change and it's happening quite quickly, but we can use these lessons today and then going ahead into the future. And quite critically, those that hold on to these lessons will certainly have a future competitive advantage. So we'll move now into some more enterprise-based roadmap examples, something that you might be familiar with. A lot of our architects out there and our user base are certainly getting these C-suite questions today. An example here, our main one, the US Air Force. They've reportedly blown past their VPN maximum capacity of 72,000 users. So everyone jumping on the VPN at the exact same time. Never happened before. And all because we're all forced into working from home or quarantine or some level of isolation. There's certainly people still working in their usual environments, but in different ways. And so now there's a lot more demand on the technology side of things. So some of the questions you may get: how exposed are information stores? For a VPN situation, you quite rightly think you're pretty well protected, but you get those questions from your C-suite, from your executive, or from any stakeholders. What level of data integration do we have? Do we have a centralized view of that? What cyber and social security practices do we have in place? And how can we ensure that they remain strong? I'm sure everyone's had this question at some time or another. Where can we cut the costs? What level of services, or how many applications or servers do we need? And what's their criticality? Can we classify them? And can we classify processes as well to say this is critical, this is extremely critical, and this one is perhaps not so critical? And then the age-old question, if. What happens if? These scenarios, what all these various scenarios, what happens if this occurs? So it's very important to take away the idea of maintaining these drills, if you will, having stress testing in place and being able to build up these scenarios in your own models before they hit. Tim rightly said, who led your digital transformation initiative? Was it your CEO, your COO, maybe your chief architect? No. For anyone answering that today, it's going to be COVID-19. So being able to build up these scenarios, and you won't be able to build them for everything, but having a good idea and doing these regular tests and drills, as it were, will certainly put you in a much better place for any future scenarios that might occur. Another common question, what do we need to achieve Project X? How many people need to have access to a certain server or infrastructure piece, maybe a VPN? Or quite often, as we're now seeing today, what will be the impact of everyone joining the same call from home, while perhaps their family members, maybe their partners are using social networking platforms, maybe their kids are trying to learn and doing schooling from a distance. They've got 40 or 50 kids on the same call at the same time, while the parents are now working and doing the same thing, basically on a call, listening to a webinar. And what impact will be that, what the impact will be for that, and how can we ensure that we have everyone still connected and being able to complete their work? And then lastly, another common question, why aren't we more agile? There's not a more broad question that's out there, I don't think. But we can start to look at that, going back to our modularity. Can we start looking at warehousing our components, whatever they may be? Maybe they're coffee cups, maybe they're jets. But can we warehouse these to a certain degree so we can bring them online as and when they're needed? Let's take a quick look at some of the dashboards. And yes, of course, this is ABACUS, but we want to show you some of these real examples that we put together. Now, they are just examples, but they are all useful. So it's important to think about what type of visualizations you may need in order to tell a story. There's going to be certain use cases you're going to be looking at. Perhaps that's business and IT alignment. Perhaps that's simply serving a customer. This particular audience, or this dashboard, I should say, would certainly be appropriate for an audience of perhaps a chief EA or a data security team or a compliance manager, any one of these key decision makers. And you can see here the types of charts and visualizations that they'd like to see in order to make their decisions. So we've got here, of course, that Gantt chart that we talked about before with our road mapping. So these are all types of roadmaps, if you will. Our bubble charts, we've got our catalog as well, showing the very technical detail. And then the age-old pie chart. You've probably seen quite a lot of jokes out there, certainly in the industry, about Dilbert and the pie chart. Let's all worship the pie chart. But all of these have the same underlying fundamental, which is time, with any of our roadmaps. So you can look at these, or the decision makers can look at these and understand perhaps what applications are creating data and security risks, and for the action that needs to be taken. What applications need to be prioritized for a security upgrade project. And using these types of dashboards, decision makers are able to quickly see an overview of the state of things and how many applications are perhaps non-compliant. We can also use algorithms to do the analysis for us. So you don't necessarily need to fill out a table or catalog. The catalog shown on screen, very much like Excel. There's no real difference to that. You've still got your rows and your columns. They still have cells that you fill out with data. And that, of course, builds up your analysis and your visualizations. The Gantt chart we're showing here is using data from that catalog, if you will. So we've got our overall capability or our vision and the underlying applications that are supporting that as well, and what their life cycles look like. In the top right with our bubble chart, we can see the number of users versus the end of life date for our applications. So you can start to understand, or certainly our stakeholders can start to understand, the criticality of these projects. And then of course we can make it super simple for them by summing that all up in a pie chart. We can look at the criticality and how many applications we have in those pieces of the pie chart. What's the criticality of these applications, and which ones do we absolutely need? Which ones can we maybe rationalize? Which brings me to my next point, road mapping for technical debt. So I'm sure, as I said before, a lot of people would have had that question. What are our costs, and what can we do to reduce those? Right now, I'm sure you all would have gone through a bit of a strain with spinning up new servers or perhaps new subscriptions, or getting people used to working from home using new technology platforms. That's a huge change. But critically, what we can provide is self-service. It doesn't necessarily need to be always going through to the IT help desk or escalate. But what we can do is provide this as a service as a self-service to anyone that needs to consume the information. Tech debt itself is now pan-enterprise, as we're saying. So there is no organization out there that doesn't rely on technology in some way, shape, or form. I'd be very surprised if there was, and if there is, certainly tell me about it. I'd love to hear about it. But everyone, or a select few, can now directly access these key metrics that they might not have ever known had existed before. So we're looking at things here, such as our tree diagrams in the top left. So you can easily dive down and drill into how our entire architecture looks, on a country basis, on perhaps a department basis as well. We can look at the total cost of ownership using key metrics and callouts. And we can look at the tech debt across locations, as you can see with our column chart at the bottom, and then our summary costs and cost per region. So very easy at a glance information which can be consumed by any stakeholder. And we can start to see how the technical debt relates to real world situations and real questions that we might have or get. Just take a bit of a break from the dashboards. One of the key fundamentals under all of this, of course, is problem solving. And admittedly, you'll all be doing this certainly under pressure, and a lot of pressure right now, I imagine. It's one of the most sought after traits in any profession, and certainly in our profession as well, is the ability to identify flaws, weaknesses, and imperfections. And knowing when you're developing a solution, if it's perhaps too complex or too simple. So you certainly need to be wary of binary yes or no answers. And that's no more true today than it is at any point. So if you're getting those questions, can we turn off this server? Don't be too quick to answer. Don't say yes or no. Certainly start to explore it a little bit and understand what the impact would be across all of the users. You might get a request from one department that will greatly affect another department. This enables you, of course, to make the best decision possible, even in the face of uncertainty. So it's not wrong to make the right or wrong call. Making a call is great. Making no call is certainly bad. You don't want to have that stagnation. And being able to combine your scenario analysis with any sort of event-driven notification system is extremely powerful. It's not enough to just say we've got the scenario we've built, or we want to just test out the scenario. You need to be able to take into account new data that's coming in all the time. Maybe there's changes happening, as we are all dealing with right now, on a day-by-day or week-by-week basis that are dramatically changing how business operates. And underneath all of that, having that decision-making process data-driven. It's very important in high-stress situations being able to quantify those risks. If you can say you can present a solution rather than presenting a problem, that's certainly going to be much better and set you up to be a much more trusted advisor and resource in your organization. So as I mentioned earlier, we are, of course, dealing with new scenarios, and a lot of those dealing with people working from home or moving our technology around. So being able to roadmap our technology planning is certainly a critical topical conversation for today. And again, here's just some of the visualizations that you might be able to use in order to have those conversations, maybe with your chief EA, perhaps with your technology standards or lifecycle management team. And one of the key parts of this is you don't necessarily need to pull together all that data yourself. There's certainly servers out there that can help you do this. You have services such as Technopedia, and they can input all that data for you, perhaps your life cycles, your start dates and end dates, your hardware requirements or software requirements. So you can easily understand and start building these models very quickly. And that enables you to answer the questions. What technologies are creating risk for the enterprise? What technologies need to have their status change? Or what would be impacted if we make certain decisions? And then you can start to take those actions. You can change the status of those technologies. You can identify target technologies to replace technology. Of course, overall road mapping, that concept of time. Where are we now? Where do we want to be? And how will we get there? Ultimately, of course, why it works is we can show the distribution of standard support and the end of life and current status of things. We can drill down by several dimensions of technologies and see what the impacts are. And we can look at our timelines with our simple charts here. We can certainly look at the dependencies using our graph view as well. So the graph view on the bottom right there is a very interesting new feature that we have available, and anyone can easily explore. It's very business friendly. They can explore the relationships between any component. That does not necessarily mean just the technology components, but that could be the strategies, it could be the processes, it could be anything in your architecture, and very easy for anyone to jump on board and use those and explore those relationships. It's also worth mentioning or drilling down into the interdependencies. So not just the relationships, but how tight those relationships are. So here we'll explore two snippets from one of our earlier road mapping webinars. First off, as we see here, we can see some of the dependencies between things. So there might necessarily be applications or technologies in your own architecture. They may be, again, going back to our coffee shop, maybe the relationship between a server and a delivery driver and how that relationship changes. But it's important here to see the impacts and using metric-based analysis. So no individual element of the architecture exists in isolation. And as we see here, we've got our data set and then we've got our visualization right next to it. They're all part of an end-to-end ecosystem. So being able to show this information and then present it on a roadmap is hugely worthwhile. We can see how the life cycles of one element is linked to another and how they impact each other as well. So being able to show this information in a very clear and understandable way and not having a spaghetti network of perhaps diagrams or any other mishmash of information will be very valuable and very sought after in any organization. Yet, of course, the more traditional style roadmaps, as we've already explored, simple Gantt charts might be presented traditionally in a PDF or a PowerPoint pack, and that gets perhaps sent to your CIO. But with these sorts of roadmaps, and of course, again, using ABACUS, you can have this information live and self-service. You can use it and have it readily available. So people that need to make these decisions, which all the inputs are changing day by day or week by week, they can do that in a very quick and measured manner. Taking a very holistic view and a very high level view over all of this, we're looking at our second scenario in one of our previous webinars, which is the ability to be able to provide some kind of strategic direction. You also, of course, need to consider the trade-offs here, because it's uncommon to have just one option available to you. CEO might come in, or the entire C-suite might come in and bring you into a meeting and say, we want to go in this direction, but then someone will pipe up and say, well, what about this? We need to consider all of those factors and the trade-offs for any which scenario that we want to explore. There's no perfect solution here. There's multiple business scenarios we need to model. And being able to compare and optimize architectures for different objectives, very powerful. Looking at it with a multiple architecture roadmap, you can see those trade-offs and the different benefits quite easily. So we've broken this down to a very simple scale, but you can easily then say, if you want to, it's a very simplified example, but you can say, okay, we're striving for reliability, or we're looking to curve any risks that we might have, or perhaps for the CFOs out there, we're looking to ensure that our costs are remediated as well. So there's a lot of different scenarios that you're likely going to have thrown at you. But the important thing to remember is that you can use all the information, data in your model to back this up and say, we have a certain level of confidence here in what we're proposing in our scenarios, in our models. and you can certainly provide then a lot more advice and a better service, of course, to stakeholders as well. Now, worth, of course, mentioning, we have a platform to help you do this. So you can certainly achieve a lot of these things very quickly and easily. And I want to show you some of the critical features which we think you might want to use to be able to do that. These are certainly available in our tool, and we want to explore those in a bit more detail to really show you the possibilities. So as I mentioned earlier, or briefly, you can certainly start to explore the relationships. You can do that with what we call graph views. So that dashboard that we passed through earlier, where I was mentioning any business user can have access to that. And it's very useful as a tool. Anyone can jump on board, or you can have a limited select few jump into that and explore the relationships between certain areas of your business or the entirety of the business. It's a very powerful feature. And being able to make these roadmaps, as it were, the entire concept of this presentation today, the webinar, is making roadmaps. Being able to make them interactive certainly drives that engagement. It puts on people the impetus to explore the information that you have at your fingertips, and making that accessible to everyone is very critical. So being able to collaborate on data and roadmaps, online collaboration, as it were, very, very important. And again, it depends on what tool you're using, but for particular tools, you don't have to worry so much about who has the latest copy, or if such and such has been emailed a certain version of a document. There's certainly a lot of tools out there that allow you to provide that level of confidence to say, this is the information, this is as accurate as we can make it. Of course, you can use various tools for your analysis and to guide decision making. We have a lot of features actually in ABACUS which allow you to do this. You can use our tried and true scenario modeling tools. You can also use your own algorithms. You can build algorithms very easily. We'll dive into that a little bit in just a moment. But that underpins, of course, all the decisions that your organization is going to make going forward. And that's no more important today than it ever have been, because we're looking at most organizations, I'd say certainly, I would say all, but certainly a vast majority doing the digital transformation projects right now while we're in this hibernation mode. And of course, you're not alone in this. We are certainly approaching the age where you can start to rely on machine learning for completing at least your data sets, if not conducting other activities, as I'm sure everyone has in their own home. You might be using various tools, perhaps various bots in order to achieve certain tasks, but you can now use these in your work functions as well to assist you on your day-to-day. And it's not all up to you, as I said before. You don't have to do this all alone. And of course, worth mentioning that this has all been done before. So while we like to present, of course, all of the new features, which are going to make your lives a lot easier, we hope, certainly, a lot of this information has been used before, and people have developed these frameworks. Many of you will be familiar with TOGAF and the Open Group Architecture Framework and its pedigree, where it came from. It has its roots in military, as well as a variety of other academic places. So a lot of these can be more academic than others, but it's important to focus on the balance for your organization. As we like to say, the Goldilocks zone, and we've got another presentation we did a couple of years ago, which focuses on that, striking that balance between the level of complexity you need in your architecture versus the speed that you need to take, or perhaps the level of detail that you want to explore. A lot of these frameworks, of course, focus internally on the organization. So there's a lot of different frameworks out there that you can use to aid in building your architecture. Some focus on what we call environmental factors, but we've also now started to introduce new frameworks which deal with the macro environment or the larger, wider environment. Because certainly scenarios as we're facing today, none of that can be controlled internally, and certainly didn't arrive from internal driven motivations. So we've now introduced things such as the PESTLE framework, or PESL framework, as some like to call it. And that looks at political factors, environmental ones, social, technology, legal, and economic ones, to really start to understand, what are all the factors that are impacting our business from the outside as well. So you can certainly model for anything internally, but you can now model for almost anything externally as well, which is very exciting. And of course, applying all of that to, again, one of our dashboards, you can see here. This is the Gantt chart I mentioned before, and being able to make that interactive and having people explore these scenarios is very important. So with this, you can track timelines and key dates and projects, perhaps technology and risks and other properties as well. You can explore all the different lifecycle properties and drill down into the details as well to provide very quick analysis to show where you need to go. It goes without saying, you know, this data needs to be up to date. It needs to be relevant. There's no point in doing a set and forget. A very tried and true statement. Every business plan fails at the first interaction with a customer. So there's no point writing things to the nth degree and then saying this is going to be what we're doing. You need to be able to adapt and change. And of course, these roadmaps are a constant requirement in any organization. We've produced, as I said before, extensive documentation on these, and we're happy to share the links with you across a couple of these as well. I want to give you just a quick overview, of course, of our graph view here. So you can see us exploring an architecture. We can look at this from a location, geography perhaps, perspective. We can start to look at things such as the servers or perhaps the departments that are involved with particular areas. We can also, of course, start to apply our heat mapping, our tagging recommendations to these too. So we can really convey that interpretation and that understanding of the organization quite quickly and quite easily. As I mentioned, we do have new features such as machine learning. So it's not up to the architect to simply do all the data entry. You don't have to wait on anyone. You don't have to have them fill out spreadsheets. They can fill out information for you, or you can have a machine start to eliminate some of that guesswork. So machine learning is very powerful in ABACUS, and you can use that to start building out your complete data set. As you can see here, we can start to fix the almost, but perhaps not quite. You've got these portfolios which have got gaps in them, but with the complete data set, they'll be so much more powerful. And machine learning allows us to do that. So it builds on your model, and it's constantly learning about the different changes in it and what you might be doing in your architecture. And then it provides a best guess as well as a confidence level in order to interpret the information that we need to deal with today. So your users can use this. Of course, machine learning is non-deterministic and algorithms are very deterministic. We've got both of those in ABACUS. And we need to realize, of course, that not all values should be set or predicted through machine learning. So it's important here, as we've got a lot of good feedback from our customers that they're concerned that some users may take the easy road, but we can certainly accelerate the quality of the data by using workflows to be able to approve certain changes, whether they're machine-based or human-based. And as I've said all along, this brings us to the fundamental methodology, which is using the roadmaps. So all this data, all this information, and all the visualizations will be worth nothing if we weren't sticking to our roadmap. You've got this underlying concept of the roadmap to be able to compare and contrast our information with KPIs and metrics. You're looking at the current state, the future state, and then using the data to roadmap the journey between them. We can tailor roadmaps to any business. Any organization there can do this work themselves. A lot of the tools we have are very business friendly, and you're able to just use drag and drops. Certainly kids out there today are using very similar methods, Scratch, Swift, all those programs to be able to build code, be able to code platforms or build new programs entirely. It's very exciting. You can use all these features. And of course, these algorithms and the data can be used to define that roadmap. So you can look at your current measures, your current state, and then look at your projected measures, of course, your future scenarios using your KPIs and metrics and analysis, and then define the roadmap that lies in between. And here we are just building that roadmap, that algorithm for you to start with that roadmap. So we're looking at our applications, looking at our recommendations here. We're attributing averages across those as well to be able to start producing that analysis. And this is with all with the help of course, the data that's already in there, plus a bit of machine learning behind the scenes. And that provides a very quick snapshot of the capability map that we have for this example organization. We can see here at a glance, perhaps which which processes might need to be refreshed, which might need to be removed. And you can provide that analysis directly to a stakeholder very quickly. Speaking of providing to stakeholders, it's no point in forcing other people to use an entirely new tool. So whatever tool you do use, very important to see how that's presented to the end user. We've sort of touched on perhaps using PDFs or PowerPoints in the past. You can certainly still do that today, but you can also present this information in a collaboration platform, using the latest technology, what everyone wants to use, these social tools where everyone can start to have those conversations. They can collaborate by setting up editable lists and dashboards, and these can be accessed within programs such as MS Teams. They can then start to have conversations. They may not even know that they're using an EA tool. You'll certainly know, and you'll have the structure behind the scenes, but they'll be able to start inputting their information, exploring the relationships, doing their own analysis, or just reviewing the analysis that you've done. So it's very, very powerful stuff. Okay, so getting to the later stage of the webinar today, and we do have some time for Q&A. So just a few more key points to remember, or key notes rather, and to wrap up. We'll provide a bit of levity to end. And this is a bit of fun to see if we can show your age a little bit. Of course, if you know the guy on the left, you might be in the later stages of your career. If you know the guy on the right, of course, you've certainly been, or maybe currently going through the stages of having kids. So that certainly puts an indication of your timeline in your career as well. And if you know the guy in the middle, you've probably, like me, you just played way too many video games. But let me just take you through those quickly. So the shocks and traps, we've got here Admiral Akbar, of course, from Star Wars. And looking at the interconnected systems and connections, you need to make sure that we're looking out for those shocks and traps, making sure that we're aware of security vulnerabilities and aware of any stagnation traps that might exist. Firms may react by cutting investment now, which will certainly negatively affect the future productivity and growth. There may be government organizations or certain government departments providing stimulus packages, and those will certainly need to be repaid in the future as well. So whatever we do today may provide a future shock or trap, and we need to be aware of those. Our G-Man here in the middle from the Half-Life video game, he's saying the right man in the wrong situation can make all the difference, and that's certainly true today. To be able to be that advisor, to be that right man or right woman, as it were, in this scenario is going to make a huge difference in how your organization moves forward. We need to be able to show that systems can adjust, cope, and deliver, how digital services are able to meet new customer demands and needs, and how agile and scalable our IT systems will be. We want to ensure that organizations are resilient, not rigid. So there's no point building a diagram, having that structure in place if it's going to collapse like a house of cards. And then lastly, of course, SpongeBob here, being ready, ensuring that readiness when we're starting to emerge from hibernation, and making sure that we have things in place such as accommodations for suppliers, which may take time to resume to the new normal, having all of their buyers back online, having to supply them, ensuring that we have taken some time for the government to resume tender processes and award contracts as well. And then, of course, looking at things such as liquidity and those changes that we might have made during the current period and how they might affect us going forward. So I think that's pretty much all for today. We do have, of course, more information available. We do have this available on our YouTube channel. You can certainly contact me directly. My email address is there, so you're welcome to send me a quick email if you have any follow-up questions. We do, of course, want to welcome you to join our digital summit, which is coming up too. So we did this last year, and this was a roaring success. I think we had about 600-700 people that joined us across the 3 days, and that was for all regions. So if you're watching the recording of this, you can certainly look forward to joining that, perhaps in EMEA or Americas, but also here in APAC as well. So pop over to the events page on our website to register for that. And on that note, I'll pass back to Tim for our Q&A.
Yeah, no, thank you, Liam. That's excellent. And yeah, we do have a couple of minutes. I know that there's already been a lot of questions coming through the chat feature. I don't know, Liam, hopefully you haven't been getting too distracted by that. So I've managed to, I think, keep up with most of them. There's definitely a few follow-ups that we'll need to do with the people. So I'm pretty sure we've got your email addresses, and the account managers will reach out to you. I will just take the quick, there was a last question there from a Rick Heyman about the meta model. Something that I guess we didn't explain too much, and we gave the throwaway word graph, graph database and stuff like that, graph views and things like that. ABACUS is built on a completely configurable backend. Okay, so we use a graph database. What that means is we can ship the product with any number of frameworks that you want, and we've got lots of hybrids. Liam talked about all the things like TOGAFs and Archimate, so we can ship it with any of the out-of-the-box ones like that. What we tend to find is most of our users do try to modify those a bit. So, it's the 80-20 rule. We always start with about 80%, and then the last 20% is always configured and modified. That's all very easy. We teach you how to do that. We don't need to do that. That's all in the hands of the power users. But the thing to always bear in mind, and Liam did use the phrase, the Frankenstein model. We've got a whole presentation that talks about this challenge. So if you've got this ability, it's the Spider-Man line. Just because, with great power comes great responsibility. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Okay, you've got to always think about what question you're trying to answer. Okay, and that should guide the shape of your meta model. Okay, because you can add anything you want. Abacus can be become a Frankenstein in 5 minutes. You can fill it up with every spreadsheet you've ever got, and you've got a whole lot of content. It's just a dumping ground, right? You really do need to work backwards from the use case. And again, there were some questions earlier on that one of the participants had about, what are the use cases, what are the missions, what are the questions you're trying to answer. So we've got lots of content about that again, but that's really the way you should approach it, because if you're trying to do a technical debt analysis, that actually shapes the meta model you need to use. Now you've got these two different approaches, which is what's called, we certainly talk about as active modeling versus passive modeling. Okay, active modeling is where you say, look, I've got this content, I've got all these spreadsheets, I've got all this repository. What sort of questions can it answer? Okay, that's a very active way of trying to do things. Passive modeling is much more about, okay, I need to just model enough to be able to answer the very question I have. Okay, so taking it, kind of like an outside in versus an inside out way of thinking. So again, there's lots of things we can talk about that, and I can see, Rick, you've got the follow-up question there. So yes, absolutely, you can start from scratch. You can start from a blank canvas, and when you talk graph, you talk about, we call them components and connections, okay, or component types and connection types. You can completely roll your own. Now, we generally try to advise you against that, because there's a fair bit of work to be done there. And so we certainly would give you, they're all freely available. Sorry, so we don't charge for any of our frameworks. They're all available through our community. So there's no reason not to try and pick and choose and drag and drop between them, because you'll start to find that the presentation we talk about, this one that's got the Frankenstein, there's 10 parts to a meta model. Most people think of the first 3. Okay, but there's 7 other parts that you really will ultimately need to do. So sorry, that's a big monologue end to that question. So yep, I think we're top of the hour now. This has been recorded, so thank you, everyone. Like I said, the chat feature, we'll go through those and do the follow-ups as we need to. Keep an eye on our website for where there's some more events coming up. The Digital Summit that Liam refers to, that's coming up. So there's going to be lots more sessions like this. And yes, I guess everyone, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your attendance. Thank you for your patience. And yeah, we look forward to speaking to you all next time. All right, cheers. Thank you.